something is clearly wrong with Meghan. And I don't mean it in a bad way, but I mean, how can you get your age so wrong?
I think it's horrible. It's just ridiculous.
This lady has turned 45. And Link, it's just such bad news because all of a sudden, this birthday, this 45th birthday, has turned into an absolute disaster for Meghan Markle.
Meghan Markle has lied about her age. Is she actually older?
The reality is not that.
There's nothing original here.
I hope you're having the best birthday you've ever had. Thank you for everything.
Which is really such a fake.
I'm not happy with what one of my daughters is doing. And I don't know what caused her to do this. We've had this conversation before. She's telling lies.
What if Meghan Markle was adopted? What if there more to her birth than just her age? Could it be that she doesn't know her own age because she's been lied to by her father and mother? Could it be that's why Doria doesn't have a bond with Meghan Markle? Because what mother leaves her daughter when she's 3 or 4 years?
3 times, the same age has supposedly come around again. And that alone is enough to make people stop and look twice. The same birthday, the same candles, the same public celebrations. But then you put one old graduation photograph beside a comment reportedly made by her own mother. And suddenly, the story starts looking a whole lot more complicated. And buried underneath all of that is a marriage record that has become the center of a much bigger claim. Here is where things get interesting, because there is a part of Meghan's alleged timeline that rarely gets discussed in mainstream coverage. Most people know the story of Trevor Engelson. His marriage to Meghan, their divorce, and everything that came afterward have all been discussed countless times. But another name sometimes appears in claims circulating online.
Rachel Meghan Markle, a woman with so many secrets, so many lies, that people have had enough. And they're all started to come out because this latest bombshell. I've had this picture for about 3 years, but I wasn't very good. I'm not very good. So I feel confident enough now to expose Rachel Meghan Markle. It is unbelievable that this woman, if there have been close personal friends for 20 years, that would mean that 2006, right? Even before she married Trevor Engelson. Yet Kelly was not invited neither to the Jamaican wedding nor the British wedding. And she's a close personal friend. Yet Oprah, I told you that there was a live maid trying to discredit me and call me a liar, saying that that email response I got in regards to a Rachel Meghan Markle having given birth to a child in 1997 was absolutely fake. And the reason they gave is because they said that it is illegal to get a copy of a birth certificate in the state of California.
Joe Giuliano, who is alleged to have been a first husband before Trevor and eventually Prince Harry. If that claim were supported by authentic public records, it would completely change the timeline people have been given. And that is exactly why the paperwork matters. The claim is not simply about gossip or celebrity drama. It comes down to documentation. When a legal marriage takes place, official paperwork is generally created. Depending on the jurisdiction and the record involved, that documentation can include names, dates, signatures, and other identifying information. Those records may then be preserved by a government office or county authority. In other words, a genuine legal document does not simply vanish because years have passed.
Meghan is a consummate survival actress. You raised this extraordinary beginning of the year when she carved 2025 in the sand. And you know, it's a very, very interesting image that it came out on New Year's Day this year, because the previous weeks had been absolutely turgid and torrid for her. She had been dubbed Duchess Difficult again. There have been allegations of bullying.
Tyrant in high heels.
This is a copy of 17 magazine, and it was published in March of 1997. In it, it mentions our Megsy is from Los Angeles and that she was 21 years old at the time of publication. That would make her birth year at around 1976. However, why is it saying here she was born 5 years later in 1981?
This is a page from a very, very old 17 magazine. And here it looks like Megxie was like a teen contributor, a young person's contributor to the magazine. And you'll see here that they contribute her as Meghan Markle, age 21, in Los Angeles, in California. Now, this edition of the 17 magazine was released back in 1997. So, if this is to be believed, and she was 21 at the time in 1997, that would make her birthday as 1976.
That leads to the question at the heart of the controversy. Does an authentic marriage certificate involving Joe Giuliano actually exist? And if it does, what does it say? If such a document were ever produced and its information conflicted with publicly reported details about Meghan's age or timeline, that would certainly deserve careful scrutiny. But there is an important distinction here. A discrepancy would need to be verified before anyone could honestly call it fraud. So why, according to people pushing this theory, has that alleged first marriage received so little attention? Journalists, royal commentators, biographers, and documentary producers have examined almost every major chapter of Meghan's public life, yet claims about an earlier marriage continue to circulate without the kind of clear...
You're wondering, why does her age matter at all? Because her age would also have an impact on her ability to have children. Because if Meghan Markle is 4 years older than what we have been led to believe, it makes it even more difficult to believe that she was able to get pregnant so quickly. Never mind the hysterectomy stories that her family have told. But that would make it more difficult because that would make Meghan Markle near 50.
Is Megxie really lying about her age? Now, when you Google her, it says that she was born on the 4th of August 1981. And with today being her birthday, as of me recording this video, it's saying that she's 44 years old.
What is going on here? Why the secrecy around this woman's birth certificate? Why the secrecy? Why the mistakes in age that are so blatant for others? And you know what? This is like her education in university, that she claims that she double major in international relations and theater, when Northwestern has never given a major in international relations.
Independently verified documentation that would settle the question. That gap is exactly what keeps the speculation alive. Then there is the old 17 magazine story from 1997. Some people argue that Meghan may have presented herself as older when she was younger. If that happened, it would be one thing for a teenager to exaggerate her age in a magazine interview. Teenagers sometimes make questionable choices about how they present themselves. But that argument has limits. A teenager exaggerating her age in an interview is one thing. A person later altering official records, changing legal documents.
And that is a super important detail. This article that was published on November 11, 2017 with the headline, "The Look That Hooked Meghan's Dad," the charming high school photos of the woman who could be Prince Harry's mother-in-law showing the sweet eyes and afro that Ms. Markle thinks made her father fall for her. Written by Caroline Graham.
Stupidly put out so many dumb lies, the car chase, etc., that now nobody believes anything they say. And that's scary and dangerous because it sometimes puts us off in directions that we need to be better about. But man, the more and more I look at and research this stuff, I'm not obsessed with these two. I'm looking at them with a very clear eye.
Government paperwork would be something entirely different. Those would involve adult decisions made over time, and that is a very different kind of allegation. One that would require actual documents and solid evidence before anyone could treat it as fact. The first alleged marriage record could reveal far more than a simple date of birth. It could open a whole trail of questions about the timeline itself. If an authentic certificate exists, it could potentially show the legal name being used at the time, the address listed on the document, and other details that might connect to school records, casting paperwork, or later official documents. One ordinary-looking piece of paperwork could suddenly become a much bigger part of the story. But there is an important catch. The existence and contents of that alleged certificate would need to be independently verified. Until an authentic record is produced, claims surrounding it remain just that, claims. And that matters, because while one disputed document supposedly sits somewhere in an archive, supporters of this theory point to 3 separate pieces of information that they believe are sitting in plain sight. Put those claims side by side, they argue, and Meghan's publicly reported timeline starts to look very different. Start with the graduation cap. There is a widely circulated photograph said to show Meghan Markle at her high school graduation, with a number appearing on the tassel. Supporters of the age theory identify that number as 95, interpreting it as 1995. According to that interpretation, she walked across the stage and received her diploma that year. Now comes the math that gets people talking. If someone graduates high school at 18 years old in 1995, the calculation would place their birth year around 1977, not 1981. That would obviously produce a very different age today. But there is a major question hiding inside that calculation. Does the number on the tassel actually prove the graduation year, and was she definitely 18 at the time? Without confirming those details, the photograph alone cannot establish a birth year. Still, that is exactly why the image has become such a powerful talking point online. It is presented as a real graduation photograph rather than a random screenshot or an anonymous graphic that could have been created on a computer. Supporters point to the physical-looking cap, the tassel, and the surrounding graduation setting, and argue that the image deserves closer examination. If the original photograph and school records could be authenticated, that would make the discussion far more concrete. Then comes another question. What about the other students who supposedly graduated alongside her? If the disputed graduation year were correct, there would presumably have been classmates, teachers, yearbooks, school records, and families who could potentially help establish the timeline. Where is that documentation? The absence of easily accessible testimony does not prove anything by itself, but it leaves room for more questions about what the original school records actually show. Now pair that claim with something attributed to Meghan's mother, Doria Ragland. Doria was born in 1956, and statements attributed to her have been interpreted by some people as saying she became pregnant at around 20 years old. The calculation is straightforward. 1956 plus roughly 20 points toward the mid-1970s. But that interpretation depends entirely on the exact wording and context of what Doria actually said. If Meghan was born in 1981, Doria would have been around 24 or 25 when she gave birth, not around 20. That is the contradiction supporters of the theory focus on most heavily. But before declaring that contradiction settled, the original interview, the precise wording, and the surrounding context would all need to be checked carefully. Because if the dates really cannot be reconciled, then the obvious question remains, which version of Doria's own story is true? Because both cannot be true at the same time. Then there is the Humphrey yogurt story, a detail Meghan has reportedly repeated so many times that it has become part of the public image surrounding her early life. The story is simple on the surface. A young Meghan supposedly working at a Los Angeles yogurt shop at just 13 years old, earning money and learning what it meant to work hard. She has discussed the experience publicly, including in her conversation with Oprah, and it became part of the broader story of a regular Los Angeles girl trying to build something for herself. But this is where the timeline theory takes another sharp turn. Critics point to Los Angeles County employment rules and argue that a 13-year-old could not legally have been employed in the way the story is sometimes described. However, child labor rules can depend on the type of work, hours, permits, and specific circumstances, so the law itself does not automatically prove that the story was impossible. To settle that question, you would need the original employment records, the exact circumstances of the job, and the rules that applied at that specific time. That uncertainty is precisely what makes the story so controversial. If the account has been accurately remembered, there should theoretically be people who worked at the shop, records from the business, or other independent material that could help establish what happened. Yet no widely accepted documentation has emerged that definitively settles every detail of the story. That does not prove the account was fabricated, but it does leave an obvious question hanging in the air. What does the original record actually show? Supporters of the age theory then place that question alongside the graduation photograph and statements attributed to Doria Ragland. 3 different pieces of information: a graduation tassel, a disputed interpretation of a ghost. Mother's comments and questions about youth employment rules are presented as if they all point in exactly the same direction, but each one still requires verification on its own. Put them together, and critics argue that Meghan's publicly reported timeline deserves another look. That is a claim, not a proven conclusion. And before you ask why nobody supposedly caught these inconsistencies earlier, there is another part of the story that critics bring up. Their theory does not begin with Hollywood or the royal family. They point to an earlier period of Meghan's life and argue that understanding the environment surrounding her at that time is essential to understanding why these age questions continue to circulate. Before Suits, before Harry, before the red carpets and royal engagements, there were stories about yachts, private parties, wealthy social circles, and European summers. This is the period that has generated plenty of speculation and conflicting accounts, with some people making claims about who Meghan knew and where she spent time. Those claims, however, should not be treated as established fact without reliable documentation. One particularly serious allegation is that she may have presented herself as younger during that period. Some accounts circulating online claim she reduced her age by several years, but those accounts need to be separated from verified records. If someone repeatedly gives different ages in different settings, maintaining that story would eventually require consistency across biographies, applications, photographs, and other paperwork. The longer an inaccurate timeline continues, the more difficult it would become to correct without creating new questions. That is the practical problem critics focus on. If you tell one person one age and another person something different, eventually those versions can collide. Documents have to match, background details have to line up, public biographies have to remain consistent. And once a version of your history has been repeated for years, changing it later could raise even more questions than the original discrepancy. By the time Meghan entered the Suits audition process in 2011, critics argue that any disputed timeline would already have been established for years. They point to IMDb information, headshots, biographies, casting material, and entertainment industry paperwork as places where personal details would normally appear. Whether those records actually contain contradictions is something that would need to be demonstrated with authentic documents. But that is where the controversy gets more complicated, because once a timeline appears repeatedly across multiple records, proving exactly where any alleged discrepancy began becomes a much bigger question. Once that age number had been repeated long enough, changing it would not have been as simple as correcting a typo. It could have created an entirely new wave of questions. That is the argument critics make when they look at the entertainment industry and the pressure placed on actresses to appear younger, especially when they are still trying to land major roles. The industry has historically been tough on actresses as they get older, and age can influence how performers are marketed and what roles they are considered for. If someone were actually in their mid-30s when they landed a role written around a younger character, critics could argue that the age difference might have affected how casting executives viewed them. In Suits, Rachel Zane was presented as a young, ambitious paralegal building her career. The theory is that the gap between the character and the performer would have needed to be minimized, at least in the eyes of those pushing the age argument. Then there is Trevor Engelson, Meghan's former husband, who was part of her life during much of this period. He knew her before the royal spotlight, before the global attention, and before her public image became so heavily scrutinized. Since their divorce, however, he has largely stayed away from publicly discussing private details of their relationship. That silence has encouraged plenty of speculation online, but silence is not proof. Trevor not giving interviews about Meghan's age does not establish that he knew about an alleged false timeline, nor does it prove that he was deliberately protecting one. It simply means that someone who knew her during that chapter has chosen not to publicly address every question surrounding it. Still, critics point to that silence and ask why he has never publicly contradicted the version of events being discussed. And that is where the story takes a much bigger turn, because once international travel and official documents enter the picture, the allegations move beyond entertainment gossip and into questions about government records. A US passport is a federal document, and knowingly providing false information in connection with one can carry serious legal consequences. But that does not mean that an alleged discrepancy in a person's reported age automatically proves passport fraud. To establish something like that, there would need to be credible evidence showing what information was actually submitted, who submitted it, and whether it was knowingly false. Meghan traveled internationally for years before marrying Prince Harry. She worked in Canada while filming Suits and traveled for work and personal reasons. International travel can involve passports, visas, work permits, immigration paperwork, and other records. Those documents can create a detailed administrative trail, but they do not necessarily all depend on a single birth certificate in the simple way this theory suggests. Different countries and agencies have different requirements, and records can vary depending on the circumstances. Then came the biggest stage of all, marriage into the British royal family. The royal household conducts extensive security and background processes surrounding major royal engagements, but claims that intelligence agencies personally verify every detail of a future spouse's entire life, go beyond what has been publicly established. There is no reliable basis for saying that every document was individually checked by MI5 or that every detail of Meghan's personal history received intelligence-level verification. Still, that leaves the central question hanging. If there really were major contradictions in something as basic as a date of birth, critics argue that an institution surrounded by lawyers, officials, security professionals, and mountains of paperwork should have had multiple opportunities to notice them. The question is not whether every rumor was investigated. The real question is whether any authentic records exist that actually contradict the publicly reported timeline. Because until those records are produced and verified, the allegation remains just that, an allegation. At the heart of this entire controversy sits one uncomfortable question. Did the palace miss something, or did it know and choose not to discuss it? If officials genuinely failed to verify a basic detail before a royal marriage, that would raise serious questions about the depth of the checks surrounding one of the world's most scrutinized institutions. But if they knew there was a discrepancy and deliberately stayed silent, that would create an entirely different set of questions. Critics argue that exposing a disputed detail during a globally watched royal wedding could have created enormous problems for everyone involved. So, in this theory, silence would have been the easier option. The problem is that neither explanation has been established by credible evidence, and the palace has not publicly addressed these specific allegations. There has been no detailed clarification, no explanation, and no public confirmation that the alleged discrepancy even exists. That silence has only allowed speculation to keep growing whenever the subject comes up. Then there is Thomas Markle. Supporters of the theory often point to comments attributed to him when questions about Meghan's birth year were raised. Rather than giving the answer they expected, he has reportedly directed people towards the official records instead. That response gets attention because Thomas knew Meghan throughout her childhood. He has spoken publicly about taking her to school, supporting her ambitions, paying for acting-related expenses, and remembering details from her early years. He has also given numerous interviews discussing her upbringing and family life. Yet critics focus heavily on one particular question: what year was Meghan born? They argue that it should be one of the simplest details for a parent to remember. At the same time, a parent's hesitation or refusal to answer a question is not proof that the public birth year is false. There could be many reasons for avoiding the subject. Still, that is precisely why. The question keeps returning. Thomas has discussed so many details about Meghan's childhood, yet when this particular issue comes up, critics say they repeatedly encounter a deflection instead of a direct answer, and that leaves the controversy exactly where it began, with one deceptively simple question. What year was she born? One of the strangest parts of this entire age controversy is not a document, a photograph, or a calculation. It is what critics say they cannot find when they look at Doria Ragland's public comments about Meghan's birth. There does not appear to be a widely documented interview in which Doria gives a detailed account of the day Meghan was born. No famous hospital room story, no long recollection of the first moment she held her daughter, and no detailed retelling that has become part of Meghan's public biography. For critics, that absence feels unusual. Mothers often remember the circumstances surrounding the birth of their children, sometimes with incredible detail. But the absence of a public story does not prove that something is being hidden. Doria may simply have chosen to keep that particular memory private, especially considering how intensely Meghan's family life has been examined over the years. Still, supporters of the age theory point to the silence and ask why this particular part of Meghan's childhood has received so little public discussion. Then there is Joshua Silverstein, who has been described in accounts of Meghan's teenage years as her first kiss. Meghan has publicly discussed the story, and Silverstein has also spoken about it. The two reportedly met through a Los Angeles theater camp around 1993 or 1994, with accounts describing them as being about 13 at the time. That is where another internet mystery enters the conversation. Silverstein's birth year has reportedly appeared differently across online sources over time, with some older references listing 1977 and later information showing 1980. But an online biography changing does not automatically prove that someone deliberately altered their age to support another person's story. Websites make corrections, databases contain mistakes, and public biographies can be updated for completely ordinary reasons. Still, the timing is exactly what has fueled speculation. If an old online record said one thing and a newer version said another, people naturally start asking what changed, when it changed, and who made the correction. The internet remembers almost everything, but not every old web page is reliable evidence. That distinction matters when a theory depends on a handful of changing dates. Then comes another detail critics love to highlight: Meghan's August 4th birthday. It is the same birthday as the late Queen Mother, Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, a hugely popular figure in British royal history. That coincidence has been treated by some commentators as something almost too convenient to ignore. But a shared birthday is still just a shared birthday. There is no credible evidence showing that Meghan selected her reported birth date because it matched the Queen Mother's. The connection may sound dramatic, especially when placed inside a larger royal narrative, but coincidence should not be transformed into proof without evidence. That is where this entire theory becomes increasingly complicated. Critics point to silence from family members, changing online records, disputed photographs, and conflicting interpretations of old statements. They then connect those details and argue that they reveal a much larger deception. But each individual claim has to survive scrutiny on its own. If one piece collapses, the entire chain becomes weaker. And now comes the bigger allegation, the idea that age was supposedly only the beginning. Supporters of the theory argue that if Meghan's reported birth year were different, then other dates in her life would also have to be reconsidered. They point to relationships, career milestones, television roles, and eventually motherhood. One version of the theory claims Meghan was born in 1975. If that were true, she would have been around 43 when Archie was born and around 45 when Lilibet was born. Those ages do not make pregnancy impossible. Fertility generally declines with age, particularly after 40. but people can and do become pregnant in their 40s. So the ages alone cannot prove anything about a person's actual birth year. What they can do is raise another question about the timeline critics are constructing. If the underlying birth year were ever proven different, then every later milestone would have to be recalculated. And that is why supporters of this theory insist the age question is not really about one number. In their view, changing that number would force a completely different version of the timeline. And that is where the controversy becomes much bigger than a simple birthday. The medical questions make this controversy even more intense, because pregnancy at an older age can involve closer monitoring and additional medical considerations. Doctors may pay attention to blood pressure, recovery, and other risk factors, but every pregnancy is different. Then there is Harry's account of Archie's birth. He described a remarkably calm experience involving candles, music, an epidural, and a quick return home. Some online commentators have questioned whether those details match typical hospital procedures. However, recovery after an epidural and discharge times can vary depending on medication, hospital policy, and the individual patient, so the account alone cannot prove anything unusual happened. The same applies to claims about blood pressure. Elevated blood pressure can require additional monitoring, but hospital stays depend on the severity of the condition and the doctor's assessment. Then came widely discussed charity event footage, where viewers focused on Meghan's appearance and movements. Some claimed they heard a strange sound when she bent forward and straightened up. That interpretation spread online, but a sound on video does not establish what caused it. Still, supporters of the age theory continue connecting these claims into one larger narrative. They point to disputed records, private family comments, and a birth timeline they believe deserves scrutiny. But none of those points proves Meghan lied about her age. So what do you think? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Then check out the videos on your screen, because there is still plenty more to unpack.